You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in.
a Mamamia podcast.
Just a warning, in this episode of No Filter, we will be touching briefly on the issue of suicide. If you need help, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14. From Mamamia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, an interview podcast with people who tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. The year was 1996. Bill Clinton had just been re-elected to his second term as President of the United States.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Prince Charles and Princess Diana were about to separate.
Well, there were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
Magazines were king in Australian media, and two tabloids reigned supreme, New Idea and Woman's Day. Nene King had been the deputy editor of New Idea, but then, in a shock move, she became the editor of Woman's Day. And that created a fierce rivalry between her former boss, Dulcie Bowling, that was nothing short of a magazine war.
There was the good and the bad times at New Idea, and then there was going to Woman's Day, and when I took it over, it was number 3. It was behind New Idea and TV Week. So when I took Woman's Day to number 1, I started to believe in myself.
Nene lived and breathed Woman's Day. She slept with the covers each night, and she had a fax machine beside her bed so that she could see all the latest paparazzi shots which would come through at all hours of the night. And this was such an extraordinary time that we've actually made a whole new podcast about it here at Mamamia. It's called Extraordinary Stories, Magazine Queens, and you can search for it wherever you get your podcasts. I'll tell you more at the end of the episode. But back to Nene. Yep, she was a magazine queen, and she loved being an editor more than almost anything. Except, perhaps, her husband Patrick.
Everybody laughed because I was such a sook at home. Whatever Patrick wanted, I sorted out for him.
Nene King is iconic, one of the most talented magazine editors in history. She's a living legend, no question. But the thing people often forget about icons and legends is that they're also human. And that's the story you're going to hear today.
I just knew I was doing a lousy job. I wasn't interested in the magazines anymore, and I was probably very, very difficult to work with.
The sudden disappearance of Nene's husband Patrick on the 24th of May in 1996, and what happened to Nene's life from that moment all the way until today is, well, it's bloody gobsmacking. And that is a phrase that I know Nene would heartily endorse. It's so her. Buckle up, my friends, and get ready for Nene King. Hello, my love.
Hello, dear Mia.
I wanted to sort of talk about your life after magazines, and I wanted to start with your beautiful Patrick. But I was also conscious that I don't want to rummage around in your grief if it's upsetting for you to talk about him.
No, darling, it's, let's face it, I get a bit guilty now because I don't always think of him. In fact, I will tell you a story against myself. I had just had to put my beautiful dog Duddles down. I had him for more than 16 years. And my best friend said to me, Nene, I think you're more upset about Duddles' death than Patrick's.
Do you think that was true? That wasn't true.
No, it wasn't true, darling. After Patrick died, I had a nervous breakdown and ended up in a psychiatric hospital and turned to drugs and became a pathetic person. But she was just kidding because I obviously was very upset about my darling Duddles. But, I'd had him for nearly 17 years. He was part of my life, and I love animals more than most people anyway.
How long were you and Patrick married? I'm pretty sure you were married, weren't you?
Yeah, we were married about 5 years. We were together about 23 years. We got married in Bangkok, just quietly, because we thought it was a bit embarrassment. It was my third marriage and his second marriage. And there was such a performance in those days because I was sort of more in the public eye. They were all trying to find out what was going on. So we just hid ourselves away in an office at the Australian Embassy at 4:00. The ambassador for Thailand married us, and we went back to the hotel and went to sleep.
What made you decide to get married after all those years together?
I don't know. I was blow waving my hair one morning and Patrick's down on his knee and I'm thinking, what's he doing down there? And he said, I think we should get married. I think he was worried that I was getting so old that I'd turn up my toes and he hadn't made an honest woman of me.
Were you his boss to start with?
Not really. I mean, he did bits and pieces on Women's Weekly, but no, I really wasn't his boss.
How did you meet?
We met through a friend. I was flatting with a girl and she was going out with this bloke from the Herald Sun and he brought Patrick around one day and we seemed to get on well. And it was lovely, but I got all stitched up because he was still married and I don't know whether he was still living with his wife or not. So that was in November and I didn't hear from him again until the March. And I got a big bunch of flowers and he appeared and never left.
What was the dynamic like between you?
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. People always say it. You know, the dragon lady at work and so bossy and so difficult and so hard to get on with. Everybody laughed because I was such a sook at home. Whatever Patrick wanted, I sorted out for him. He was my rock, you know. We went our own separate ways a lot of the time because, as you know, he became obsessed with diving. And I was obsessed with magazines. Every now and again we'd have a lamb roast on a Sunday, tell each other we loved each other, and then go off in different directions. He had a sort of an odd sort of life. The one thing he really was wonderful about, he thrived on my success. He didn't mind that I was Queen of the May and that I was, you know, running around being so successful. He loved it.
You know, he was ahead of his time in that regard, wasn't he? Because it was the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
When there weren't a lot of women in your position and then men in his.
Well, I can remember another editor of another big magazine there. Her marriage broke up because her husband got cranky all the time because she was getting all the kudos. And most men just didn't like their women being so successful. But I was lucky. You know, he used to pat me on the shoulder and I'd burst into tears if I hadn't had a perfect circulation one week. And he'd say, darling, you're not a freak.
What did he mean you're not a freak?
Because I didn't believe that I was very good. I couldn't believe that I was so successful. I was so nervous about getting the circulation every week. And, you know, when it kept increasing, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd done it.
Was there a moment that you felt, I've arrived, I'm good at this, I'm powerful?
Yes.
When?
When I took Women's Day to #1 and Kerry Packer rang me and Richard Walsh was thrilled and I thought, you know, it's taken me a long time. There was the good and the bad times at New Idea and then there was going to Women's Day and when I took it over it was #3. It was behind New Idea and TV Week. So when I took Women's Day to #1, I started to believe in myself.
You were so much larger than life and so dynamic. And the only person that I can think of that sort of matched you on that level was Kerry Packer. I never saw any interactions between the two of you. I was never in those rooms. I was really junior. What were those interactions like? What was the relationship between you and Kerry?
Very good. I was successful. He bought Woman's Day. I think it was making about $8 million a year, and in 4 years it was making about 50 million. He loved success. He loved loyalty, and of course I was totally loyal to him. And, we got on extremely well. I said to him one day, because all these blonde girls were hanging around him, and as we know, he had the eye for the girls. And I said to him one day, "Oh, I wish I was tall and blonde and young. You'd really love me." He said, "Darling, stay on the factory floor, make me lots of money, and you'll last longer."
A truer word never spoken. He was notorious for sometimes incredible acts of kindness and also ripping people to shreds sometimes. But I can't imagine most people, when he was in a mood where he wanted to rip them to shreds, they'd just go very quiet. I can't imagine you doing that.
No, he really was very good to me. When I joined his board, he picked me up personally and escorted me there. When I was going through a difficult time, he wanted to send me to Betty Ford to try and, sort me out.
To rehab, he was going to pay for you to go to rehab. He often did a lot of lovely, kind, behind-the-scenes things, didn't he?
Yeah, he wanted to send me to the Harvard Business School, and he thought that'd be good for me. But we didn't have to fight because I was doing so well and he was pleased. I mean, I've sat in board meetings and I've seen grown men cry.
When I worked for the Packers, I was always very good at negotiating on behalf of them and to save the company money, but I wasn't very good at negotiating for myself. Were you good at asking for what you were worth?
Yeah, not so much what I was worth. I mean, as I learned later in life, I didn't care about money. But I said to him one day, I should run Women's Weekly as well as Women's Day. And he looked at me and said, "All right, pet." And that was it.
The day Patrick went missing, I was living at Bondi at the time. I seem to recall that it was a beautiful Saturday, sunny day in Sydney. And I remember looking out my window and seeing a lot of helicopters over the ocean. And I only found out later, because the internet didn't exist yet, that they were looking for Patrick. What do you remember of that day?
I was down at a beach house with my girlfriend, and the deal was with Patrick. He would always ring me when he'd come up from a dive, just to tell me he was safe. And it was supposed to be a short dive, and it was about midday, and I said to my friend Val, I should hear from Patrick. Anyhow, to cut a long story short, there was no phone call, and by about 5 o'clock, I was frantic. And I finally found one of his diving buddies who said, "Oh, my God, Nene, don't you know? They've been searching for him all afternoon."
What did you do?
I packed up the car, started smoking, and my girlfriend kept lighting the cigarettes the wrong way, and we drove 3 hours back to Sydney. I had the dogs, and that was it. I got a bag of clothes that belonged to him the next day, and there was no body. I was told that a shark had been involved, and he was actually diving very deep, and the police wouldn't go down to find him. So his friends went down searching for him the next day, and I said to them, "If you find him, please leave him there." I didn't want him to be brought up. God knows what he'd have been like. And he loved the sea and he loved diving. And I don't know to this day if they ever found him or not.
When you first got to Sydney, where did you go?
Went home and sat there all night, sitting in my bed, shivering.
Did you have hope still?
No. I had no hope at all. And people had got onto it and the phones were ringing and there was a television people outside. No, I just sat in the bed and shivered a lot and I was actually in shock. And the police took me out the next day to show me where he'd gone down. And that was ghastly, but
Did you want to do that? Did you want to go out and see where he'd last been?
yeah, I wanted to go, but the sea was angry, it was very dark, and it was depressing. And again, my mates in the press were sort of following me around. Yeah, I wanted to see where he'd gone.
What was it like overlaying your grief and your shock with suddenly becoming the story?
It didn't worry me because I understood it. You know, I followed stories all my life and I knew, magazine editors' husband drowning and sharks, and I knew it was a good story and I didn't shy away from the press. When there was a coroner's report and there was a court case, the police came to me, or maybe the magistrate said to me, "Oh, Nene, the press are out the front. I'll take you out the back." And I said, "No, they're my colleagues. I will talk to them."
Did you want to save the exclusive for your own magazines?
No.
Is that completely cynical of me? Like, as an editor, I would have been like, you saved that exclusive.
No, it happened too quickly. And so many people, you couldn't have had an exclusive because so many people were onto it. It was on the news and in the newspapers.
Not having a body or a grave to visit, does that sort of affect the grieving process for you?
Not at all. Not at all. People say to me, "Oh, Nene, you don't have closure." I think that's absolute garbage. I have closure, Mia. I can't see him. I can't smell him. I can't touch him. And I'm so grateful that I didn't get a body because if a shark was involved, God knows what he would have looked like. And I mean, I think about him all the time. Not as much as I used to, and I get a bit guilty. But I didn't want a body. He believed in Buddhism, so we had a wonderful service in a temple, and I wouldn't want to visit a grave. That's too depressing. I've got wonderful memories, I always will, but I'm so grateful I didn't get a body.
I remember either at the time or afterwards there was sort of gossip around, but did he really get taken by a shark? It was a bit sort of like Elvis. Did he just disappear?
Oh, my girlfriend thought he was sitting on a beach in Mexico.
What, to get away from you?
Yeah, get away from me.
He loved you.
Yeah.
Did part of you hope that that was true though because maybe he'd still be alive, or you never really thought it?
No. They found his dry suit, which had a big rip down the side. So obviously a shark had been involved. And there were all sorts of rumours about him committing suicide, that he died of a heart attack. He wasn't very well before he died and people thought he'd necked himself. There were all sorts of rumours, but that's life.
You're listening to No Filter with Nene King. So what happened after he died? You were in shock, you were in grief. Is that when your addiction issues started, or were they already... He used to like to smoke quite a bit of dope, didn't he?
Oh, yes. You know he was an alcoholic.
No, I didn't know that.
Yes, he was an alcoholic. And it got so bad when he moved to Sydney. He had a terrible attack one day and the doctor at the hospital said, "You'll be dead in 3 months if you don't stop drinking." Oh, he was a huge drinker, typical journo. He used to drink a big mug of gin in the morning and drink all day.
Did you drink together? Was that something that you both did?
Funnily enough, I must be the only journalist in the world that doesn't like booze. But anyhow, I said to him, I'm leaving you unless you do something about this. So he went into rehab for 3 weeks, came out, was a very good place, and it's amazing who he bumped into when he was there. All sorts of politicians and priests and doctors. Anyhow, he came out and never touched a drop.
What happened to you after he died? Did you go back to work straight away? Did you take some time?
I went back to work far too soon. I didn't grieve. I just became a different person from somebody who loved music and reading and magazines and loved to be with people. That all went out the window. I've never read, and you know as well as I do, you've been an editor, you know how we read. I have never read anything since he died, and I don't listen to music.
Wait, what do you mean? You've never read what since he died?
I mean, I'll read a caption every now and again, but I used to go on holidays and take lots of books, and as you know, I'd read every page proof. I'd read magazines and newspapers from all over the world to get ideas. I can't read. I've never been able to read since he died.
Do you mean like it's a concentration thing?
I don't know what it is. My girlfriend bought me Malcolm Turnbull's book. She knows I love Barack Obama. And I get through a page and I can't read anymore.
Wow, that must have made your work as an editor fairly challenging.
Yes, it did. I mean, I just fell in a heap and I should have gone away. I was a lousy editor and a lousy boss after Pat died, and I should have just gone off into the distance and disappeared instead of driving everybody mad and having nervous breakdowns.
What did your days look like during this time and how long did it go on for?
Oh, it went on for a few months. I mean, I used to sleep with Woman's Day, the cover under my pillow. And I can remember looking at a cover of Woman's Day one night and thinking, I don't care. So that's when I retired.
So that lasted for a few months. What was the circuit breaker that made you say, I can't keep going, I have to leave? Or did the Packers ask you to leave?
No, they didn't ask me to leave. They were wonderful, very supportive. I just knew I was doing a lousy job. I wasn't interested in the magazines anymore. And I was probably very, very difficult to work with.
Is it true that James offered to go to AA with you? Did you have addiction issues at that time?
Yes,
What were you addicted to?
marijuana.
So you sort of used that to just zone out.
Yep, I used to get home every night and smoke. As soon as Pat died, a great friend of mine rolled me a few joints and it went from there. I just became addicted and it just softened my brain. I didn't care, Mia. I had no respect for myself. To think that I gave advice to the women of Australia, on how to look after themselves in their lives, and I was the opposite. I was a disgrace.
Do you remember some particularly low moments?
They were all low. I can't remember being happy. I used to dread going into work. I'd come home and the house was so empty. I occasionally thought of, trying to end it, but I wasn't strong enough. So I just, dragged myself around.
So what happened after you left magazines?
I moved to Noosa. I had a sick mother. But when I left magazines, I ended up in a psychiatric hospital suffering from drug addiction and also depression. And I was in and out of the Melbourne Psychiatric Hospital for 2 or 3 years getting treatment.
What's a psych hospital like?
Terrible. They all thought I was a nurse. They couldn't believe that I was one of them. I'd be sitting out in this little courtyard when we'd take a break and they're all smoking and shaking and they've got bandages on their arms where they've tried to cut themselves. It was very, very difficult. But I'm writing a book. I'm going to, because people know about my life in magazines, but I'm thinking of writing a book that says From Magazines to Madness.
Oh, I'll buy that book, Nene King.
Because I really was mad. I really had a terrible breakdown, and I really don't even know to this day if I've ever completely recovered.
Who was around for you then? Was it hard to be your friend? Was it hard to support you?
I've had a couple of very, very close girlfriends that stuck by me, but I just didn't want to mix with people. I just stuck to myself. People wanted to be my friend in the psychiatric hospital. They were all, "Can I be your friend?" No.
Well, you were famous and possibly a nurse.
Yes. They kept coming to me with their problems, and I said to them, "Listen, sweetheart, I've got more problems than all of you put together."
Were you financially okay when you left magazines? Did you have a nest egg?
Yeah, I had a lot of money. I was described as the richest woman in publishing. I had a lot of money. I had a habit of spending a lot of money.
On what?
Oh, anything. Helping people, just anything. I mean, I used to walk into Chanel or Louis Vuitton and buy a bag that was worth $5,000. Now, if I get a T-shirt at Kmart for $6, I am thrilled.
Do you remember the first time you tried ice?
Absolutely. I was sitting in my back garden in my beautiful house in South Caulfield, and I tried it, and I think I sat there for a day and a night. I didn't move.
How old were you then? Were you in your 50s or 60s?
Yeah, 50s, yeah.
And how does that happen?
I had these two boys living with me who were smoking dope and doing ice and cocaine, and of course I'm as mad as a meat axe, so I joined them.
That was a pretty dark time, wasn't it?
It was a disgusting time. I was so unhappy and wanted to be loved that I allowed these two creeps to wipe me out. But no one's to blame. People kept saying, "Nene, they're taking you down." I wouldn't listen. I was absolutely blinded. One day I woke up and I was broke.
Do you actually remember going, hang on, where is my money? Or was it a slow dawning realisation?
So, and when it all hit the fan and I went to the police and I got a lawyer, the QC said to me, "Jesus, Nene, where's all your money?" I said, "I don't know." I did whatever this creep said to do. I absolutely besotted with keeping someone around me that, I thought would look after me.
I can't imagine how devastating that was. I feel sick at how vulnerable you were.
But I allowed it to happen.
Well, Nene, it wasn't your fault. You didn't allow it. You were taken advantage of during an incredibly vulnerable period in your life.
Yes, I suppose so. But I think I've come out the other end. I mean, I'm broke. I live on the pension and, I have a nervous breakdown every time a letter with a window arrives for me. But no, I mean, I don't want for anything. I've got a roof over my head. I'd love to have some money. Not that I want to travel. I'd love to have another Lexus. But what do I need? Nothing really. I want to keep good health.
How is your health now?
It's pretty good. I mean, so many people I know have turned up their toes Oh, God, had terrible cancers and things. Touch wood, I've been pretty lucky. I want to finish the book before I turn up my toes so I can go out and promote it. That's it.
How have you felt watching what's happened to James Packer over the last few years? You guys were close. He was very protective of you. He's someone else who sort of has really had some highs and lows.
Heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. You would remember him. He was a tall, beautiful boy with a shock of black hair. And when he was going out with Kate, I used to have to babysit Kate and have coffee with her at the Sheraton next door. And, you know, my doctor said to me one day, Nene, you've got bipolar. And I said, that's garbage. And this is what James says he's got. And if he's got real bipolar, it's a horrible disease. It's horrible. And it's heartbreaking to see what's happened to him.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Are you happy now?
Yes, look, I take each day. I'm sort of grateful that I'm still here. Mia, I don't know really what it's like to be very happy now. I plod on and make the most of what I've got.
Have you had periods of happiness since you lost Patrick?
Not really. I had a difficult time when my mother was sick. I mean, you know, I've had some good times, obviously. My time in Noosa had its moments, and for a while I used to give talks to different groups, which I quite enjoyed. And, you know, I do get some joy. I work with a mental health group here and talk to people that go through depression because it seems to help. People don't seem to believe that someone like me has ever been depressed. And
Has there been any romance since Patrick?
nothing, no. Oh, God, no. No, I had a little Greek man that used to follow me around.
No interest?
No, as I said, so many things happened when Patrick died. I stopped reading, I stopped listening to music, I stopped being social. And the thought of sex, Mia, I'd much rather go to bed with my cats. People often say, oh, Nene, have you met another man? I couldn't think of anything worse than sharing my life with another man. Patrick spoiled me, Mia. He really spoiled me.
What about companionship?
No, I don't need it.
Friends?
Yes, I've got a wonderful friend in Melbourne, a wonderful friend in Sydney, and a wonderful friend in London, and we keep in touch. I've made a couple of friends with some neighbours, which we occasionally go to a movie and things. No, I'm happy on my own.
I'm so glad to hear it. You are such a force, Nene King. You're such an influence in the lives of so many. I hope you know that. And I think about you often.
Thank you, darling. I'm a bit of an embarrassment these days, but never mind. I had my moment in the sun.
Oh, what a woman. If you loved hearing Nene King on No Filter today, this was just a tiny part of her story. All of her magazine years and what happened during that time, and not just her magazine years, but the birth of iconic magazines like Clio, and how the Centerfold came about, and Ida Buttrose, and what happened in the 90s in the glossy magazines and the supermodels and grunge, and how models used to eat tissues at photo shoots because they had to be so skinny to fit into the clothes. We have made a podcast interviewing all of the women who made that time in history. It's called Extraordinary Stories. The first season of the Extraordinary Stories podcast is about these magazine queens. It's hosted by Emma Gillespie, who also produces Mamamia Out Loud. She's been on my Instagram. She's got the most dreamy voice that everyone's obsessed with. And it's a very different podcast for us. It is just spellbinding. I've listened to the first few episodes, and you'll hear from Nene and Ita all of whom were interviewed for this show, as well as me and loads more guests as Emma takes you through the absolute golden age of Aussie magazines. Now, the first 2 episodes of Extraordinary Stories are going to be available for free wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll link to them in the show notes. And then future episodes of this weekly podcast are going to be available exclusively to Mamamia's new membership, M+. And to learn more, head to mamamia.com.au/M+, that's MPLUS. This episode was produced by Mel Sauer. The executive producer of No Filter is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you next week.
What do you know about Ita Buttrose?
What have you been doing up there? He said, And I said, well, we've been designing magazines. Let me see what you've been doing. So I brought them down, all of them. There was a man's magazine and a gardening magazine and a kids magazine and Cleopatra. He said, let me see that one. And then he said, this is it. We'll do this one.
Cleo magazine.
I can't give you any guarantees that it's going to be magnificent, but if money, time, effort and a good staff mean anything, then this magazine's going to be a great success.
How tabloids work.
We were cogs. Okay, we weren't Rupert Murdoch. We weren't causing these problems, but at the same time we were cogs, and so therefore we were culpable.
Fashion magazines.
I got flown to Paris for a manicure. Literally for a manicure.
Extraordinary Stories is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the stories you thought you knew, told by the women who really do. Join me, Emma Gillespie, over the next 5 episodes and hear how across 4 decades, one brave and bold decision at a time, a handful of Australian women became the most influential in the country.
We had these dresses that we had to shoot to put on the cover, and the models were so thin, and we still couldn't find models thin enough to get into the dress. They looked like christening robes. And I remember having dinner with a very top agent, and she said to me, yeah, no, it's a super thin season. Some of the girls have been eating tissues to try and keep their weight down.
The magazine queens shaped generations.
We did open the door to all the possibilities that lay ahead for women.
Lined the pockets of some of the nation's richest men, were at the centre of the century's biggest stories, lived lives of unimaginable glamour, and yes, arguably destroyed a few reputations along the way.
There was no reason for me to talk to her. And of course, when I knocked her off, she was really pissed off.
Extraordinary Stories. The first 2 episodes are available for free wherever you get your podcasts.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.